What's up, gangsters? Okay, this is one of those videos that's going to appeal to like 5 of you. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's all any of my videos are ever good for. I don't know. Anyway, this one is going to be a CAD tutorial in Fusion. I posted some pictures in SMCG not too long ago, and my buddy Matt Flegel asked for a video tutorial about what I did, and I was like, yeah, be careful what you ask for. And so, yeah, here you go, Matt. Here's nearly an hour of how to do that thing. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of work on hashtag the real tiger lately, and I had posted some pictures in SMCG showing this door handle, and Matt Flegel asked me for a video tutorial, and I thought, you know what, this is a pretty good one because this involves some things that I have not demonstrated before. So let's take a look. Let me see if I can basically just step through this and show you how I did it. So, all right, so the first thing is to activate the door handle by clicking the dot there. And then, so we can only look at that and not have to try and look at all the other things, let's right click and use the isolate command, which is super handy when you've got lots of components and things get very busy. All right, so you can see what's happening here. And if you don't know what I'm doing, when I've got the orbit mode selected for the camera, wherever you click and hold is going to become the new center. And that's a very handy thing as well. So you can see this is a pretty interesting part. It would be really straightforward if it were not for the fact that this handle has some complex surfaces there. But I think that I can do this, or at least I should say I thought that I could do it in a pretty straightforward fashion when I was planning. But this is a point to say that one of the most important things when you're doing something like this with Fusion, or really any design software, is understanding the shape. Because when you understand the shape, that is what's going to formulate your strategy and your tactics for how you actually create it. And I can look at this. Actually, I was looking at the real thing here, and kind of thinking that through before I ever even started the process in Fusion. All right, so back over here, what I'm going to do is just back this up. I'm going to grab the timeline slider here, and we're going to just back all the way up to the very first step. And let's take a look at this sketch, because there's a couple of important things here. First, you'll notice is that this sketch is only partially constrained. This is one of those cases where I just don't feel like I'm going to go to the effort of completely constraining it, because these are splines. And in order to fully constrain those, you've got to dimension each one of the control points. And I just don't feel like I need to do that, even though I really only have to do it on this one curve, since I mirrored this one across this construction line and then mirrored both of those across this construction line. If you don't know how construction lines work, they are super handy. You can draw a line, just L for line, create the line, and then you can select it and go over here and do construction line, or just hit the X key and it'll turn it into a construction line. And they're super handy for a lot of things, like when you need when you need sketch geometry that's not going to be active in terms of making a profile that you're going to extrude or do whatever with later. All right, so I've got this whole thing laid out here, pretty straightforward, and it's all based on this projection of a circle that's from the hole that's made in the side of the cab for the assembly pin, which is this circle right here. And so this diameter relative to that projected circle creates the tolerance around that assembly pin. And I've left it pretty generous in this case. I find that I always am too aggressive with my tolerances, and then when I go to print the parts, they're just a little too tight. So I've left a total of 0.3 of a millimeter of clearance on the diameter, just to make sure it'll easily slide in there, because this is a tiny little part. It's not one that I want to have to fuss with. All right, so there's some what and how and why to get the thing started with this basic feature. And I'm just going to undo so that I don't preserve any thing that I draw to demonstrate with. So let me just slide this forward, and you're going to notice that I've got 3 protrusions that I generated from the same sketch. And I do that a lot, and it's not just about being efficient. It's also because that first sketch allows me to lay out the whole thing and let me feel assured that it's going to look the way I want it to. Another thing you'll notice about this protrusion is that when I extruded it, I put a taper on it, because that's there in the real thing, because this is either a cast or a stamped part that's got a draft on that bit right there. So that gets me to the the basic features that create the beginning of the part. And then I just came along and added this thing for the shaft. And the next thing is that I'm going to start to formulate my plan for how I'm going to generate this this handle. All right, and I feel like I'm going to do that by creating some surfaces in forms and using those as kind of a cage to ultimately generate the solid body. And this is how I use forms more often than not. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch for the outside of the handle. All right, kind of gives me the overall profile view of it, and I'm using this projected face of this shaft to attach it to, and then I've just got some dimensions in there that that set up the overall length of the thing, and you can see that that's all fully constrained. And you can see this part's only, not even a 1/4 of an inch, about 6 millimeters in length. All right, so that gets me there. And then I'm going to go ahead and generate a solid for that. And this is going to violate a maxim that you guys hear me or see me say a lot. Which is to always end up with a single body. And that's generally true, but in this case, I'm going to end up with 2, because this body is going to be used as a construction body. And you'll see what I mean by that here in a second. But the bottom line is that I am going to need a plane for the next step. I'm going to need to generate a construction plane. All right. And so what this is a plane at angle. And I've just used that construction line from this sketch that generates that solid as the axis that this plane would pivot around if it were going to. But it's not. It's going to be level to the ground, and so it's got 0 angle on it. And that gives me the plane that I'm going to use to generate this sketch. All right, and when I turn that on, you can see why I'm using this solid as the construction reference. All right, so what I've done with this sketch is basically just create some line entities that I'm going to use to extrude surfaces from. You can see the thickness of this body is greater than what the handle is going to be, but I did that to account for the fact that there's a curve on the end of the handle, and I need some material there to make that. All right, so, and these are also just splines that are unconstrained. All right, so I've got those sketches ready, and now I've got all the things that are required to generate my form. Okay, so let's get back out of this, and I don't need this body to be visible anymore, so I don't need it for anything anymore. All it was, as you can see, it was to create a projected reference for this front face and for these points back here on the end of the handle. And I could have done it a different way. I could have, just sketched those and dimensioned them, but it is what it is. All right, so that gets me the sketches that are set up for my form. All right, so let's jump ahead. And now you can see if I that I have some new entities here, and that these are all surface bodies. And this is what I mean when I say that how I use forms more often than not is to create this cage that will surround a volume that will end up being the solid that's required to create the final part. All right, and you can see that it's not a completely closed volume yet. There's an opening here, and I'll show you how I'm going to deal with that. But for the moment, let's jump in here and take a look at these inside of forms. Okay, and you can see, all right, that this body here is an extruded form. All right, extrude of just that profile, and I'll do it again just so you can see what's happening here and how you have to work this. And even when you disable the view, you still see the shadow outlines of the finished surfaces. So all I would do is go in here and tell it I'm going to do an extrude and grab that profile. And when you do an extruded form, you're going to see immediately that's wrong, right? Like, that's not following the exact outline that I created, okay? So what we have to do is add some segments. You'll notice you've got a face here and a face here, face here, face here. There's a total of 8 faces that wrap all the way around this form. So what you have to start doing is kind of playing with it and adding some until you get more of them. And I really shouldn't have done that. I didn't mean to hit OK. So we'll undo the extrude. We'll start over. and we'll pull that out. And I also did it as a symmetric. All right, and it's going to extend beyond the boundaries of the actual part for good reason, and I'll explain that in a second. But back to this thing here. If I change this number, okay, you can see that as this number of faces goes up, that it starts to become more like what I want it to be. There's also a couple of options here. All right, you'll notice that that it's got more faces on these sharper curves because I've got the curvature option set. But if I go to uniform, they're equally spaced all the way around, and it's not as accurate. Okay, you need more smaller faces on a tighter curve, as you might assume. And what this ended up being that worked pretty good was 24 faces. And if I said okay now, I'd go ahead and have that that extrusion there. Now this thing right here, front faces, this controls the number of faces along the extrusion direction. So you can see this is one long face here, but if I change, or actually it's two because it's on either side of the sketch plane. So if I say 2, you can see if I go to 6 or 26, you can see that what happens there. Now, a rule of thumb to observe is that you want to have the least number of faces possible to get the job done. All right, that's just a good rule to always stick with. Okay, so I'm going to turn these sketches off and turn these bodies back on. Okay, at least these first two. All right, these are both just basic extrusions. All right, nothing special there. Just extruded them in a straight line, and I did that with the third one as well. But because this thing has got a sort of a domed face here, I had to start manipulating this form, and this is where forms becomes really powerful, okay? And I could spend a long time just going through exactly how I did this, but this is where you start to learn to get really good at how you generate faces and how you make selections, okay? When I created this one, all right, let me turn this sketch back on, okay? When I created this extrusion, I started, turn off chain selection so that I get the right segments here. All right, so I get all of these. Okay, and I know that I want it to be symmetric on both sides, so I do that. All right, so we've got that. But you can see I've only got a total of 16 faces because there's this 8 on each side of this center line. All right, now I know that I'm going to want to work around a surface that's evenly split right down the middle of this handle. So I'm going to keep that the way it is, but I'm going to make these be uniform because I'm not really going to be working down here on this end. This is all pretty much a smooth curvature, but I need more of them, so I'm going to go to, let's see, I think I did 24. All right. Now, I need more because this curvature is going to be going out of the plane right here. And so I need to increase this. I think I did 8. Yeah, that looks about right. So now you can see that on either side of this center line, but within the bounds of this original profile, I've got 3 faces that I can use to work this surface. Now, that may be more than I need. It may be less than I need. You kind of just develop a feel for this. because I have an idea of how I'm going to end up manipulating this thing. All right. So let's just say, okay, and go ahead and create that surface. Hopefully the beach ball won't be bad news. Okay, so now that it's done thinking, all right. So what I have right now is I've just got this, same thing, simple curved, simple surface curved in one direction. In order to start making a curve in a different direction, I have to start selecting entities in this form to move. That's the basic strategy, all right? So if I select modify, you can see right here the selection filter is on points, and every single one of these points can now be selected and moved. But I don't want to do that, not yet, okay? I'm going to start with edges, and I know that the center line of this thing needs to be out further. So I'm going to double click the center line. That gives me the whole thing. And I could move the entire thing, but I know that these over here on the end don't need to move in the same way. So I'm going to use Command, and I'm going to unselect those. Try not to select any new ones that I don't need. Sometimes you got to zoom in. All right. And come on. Okay, so these are the only ones that I want to move as my first step, okay? And I just kind of have to, I'm going to move it 0.5 millimeter and see how things go, all right? So that's my first move, and you can see that's nothing like what I want it to be, all right? But what I'm going to now do is come along here, and I'm going to do the same process on this line right here. But before I do that, let me show you a really handy thing for working on a surface like this, and that's symmetry, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a face on either side of this center line, and oops, it still thinks I've got that other line selected. Okay, so a face. All right, now it turned this center line green, okay? Now this is super handy because any modification that I make over here, see it's in yellow, is going to also happen on the mirrored side of that center line, and it saves you a shit ton of time. So let me go back and do also the same selection process to get just the ones that I want. And now, because I moved that center line 0.5 millimeter, this one, I don't need to move it as far. And I'm going to take a guess, and I'm going to say 0.3. Okay, so that's kind of starting to go in the right direction, but maybe it's not quite enough. Let's say 0.4. So you can see that I'm starting to build a curve there, but not necessarily the way that I want, because the end of this thing here needs to be different. All right, so I might have to go back and move those as well, but I can also just move points, okay? If I change now back to the point filter and I start selecting points, okay, let me zoom in here, okay? I start selecting points, and I'm going to use the Command key, and I'm going to select all three of these, and I'm going to move those back down, okay? Now that kind of starts going in the right direction, but not quite. So let's grab this one, and let's move it down. Okay, now you can see things can start to get goofy in a hurry. Okay, so that's why I say that this is really an exercise in learning how to select and manipulate different entities. All right, and the fact is that when I did this thing, the original thing, let's go back to looking at this, the finished surface, that it was just a process of carefully selecting the edges that I wanted to move. And then once I was pretty close to it, I started really fine-tuning it by moving just points. Now, you can see that this can get really tedious, because if you've got, all these points and you're grabbing this one right here and you're moving it 0.1 millimeters, and then you're moving over to the next one and moving it 0.1 millimeters, or whatever, that not only is there some guesswork involved, and that you're kind of having to eyeball this thing and look at it and see if everything looks good along the way, and then you may make one move and that affects something in a different place, and you have to go make an adjustment and then come. It's an iterative process is what I'm trying to say. But it can take some time and it can get pretty tedious, but it's also pretty rewarding when you finally get that complex surface that you want. And, it's a double-edged sword. The ability to manipulate the surface point by point or edge by edge or face by face, that's the real power of forms, because it lets you do it in this sort of free-form way that really would be very difficult, if not impossible, if you were using the traditional way of generating surfaces from sketch curves, all right? So that's just the way it is, right? Now, one thing that you need to learn to do to make this a little bit easier and more effective is in how you change the way that you view this. So right now, these are all smooth curves, and you think, that's really the best way to look at it, and there's a point where it is, but changing the display mode of a body is very important, because when you go to box mode, okay, you're gonna see it in this much more angular fashion, and this makes it a lot more obvious when something is a bit out of whack, okay? And you can make your adjustments much more effectively. Like, I'm looking at this thing now, and I kind of feel like that these 2 points here maybe should move down a little bit, okay? Because there's no curvature here, even though I'm starting to generate curvature over here. So what I would do is I would just go along, and I would go to point selection mode and grab this one. And because I have symmetry turned on, it should handle this one right here as well. And I'm going to back this point in, not that far, not 0.1, but 0.05, just to start to generate that curvature, okay? And again, you can see I'm making minute adjustments, but they have a significant impact. So then I turn that off, and now let's go back to smooth display mode and see how it looks. See if we're still cool with that. Oh, I got to turn that body on. I always forget that I have to select the body that I'm working on to change it. Okay, so looks pretty good. I like it. Makes me pretty happy. All right, hopefully that's a change that I'll want to keep. But the bottom line is, now that I'm done making all of these forms, and look, trust me, I didn't get all this done in one shot. I was in and out of editing this form probably a dozen times before I was fully satisfied with it. But once I am, it's finished form, and now we've got these surfaces right here. Okay, now how do I turn those into a solid body? I mentioned that I needed to take care of this opening right here, and so I just created an additional surface body right there to cap off that end, and it's just an extrusion of a line. Okay, now I'm going to use a super powerful and handy command called the boundary fill, and that's over here under the surface menu. And boundary fill is going to basically let you take all of the surfaces that create the boundary of the volume I want to keep and do a bunch of math so that you end up with nothing more than that volume. And that's why I've extended these surfaces beyond that volume intentionally. Because if you just make all of them where they meet exactly, not only is that hard to do, but Fusion is not going to like the math. It just basically wants to know, okay, I'm going to throw away all of this excess material out here and create this volume. And you can see you could do that by hand by using the trim surface command, but it becomes very tedious to do it that way, and you don't need to, because the boundary fill command is going to automate that entire process for you to the point where I'm going to initiate a box select, and you can see now it's grabbed all of these surface bodies, and it's already figured out that this volume in green is the thing that I'm going to want to keep. And when you, and I select that cell and I generate that, and it's going to create that surface body. All right, I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to go ahead and step this forward one notch, and and you can see a solid body appeared here in the feature tree, the browser, whatever you like to call it, and now you can see that I've got that basic body, basic solid body, and it's still unattached to the rest of the thing, but it's there and it looks pretty good. What I'm really focused on is that outside curved surface, and it looks pretty good. But I want to round off all of these edges. And so that's what these next three features are, is just going through here and rounding these edges by using the fillet command. And yeah, I don't know. It's the last few updates, I get a lot more of the spinning beach ball than I should be. But it is what it is. We soldier on. All right. Accidentally. Sometimes when I mean to initiate the orbit, I end up dragging it, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so that gets me that rounded edge. All right. The next one is going to just round this edge right here. Now, could I have done all of these in a single fillet command? Yeah, maybe. But sometimes you want to just very intentionally keep the math simple for Fusion for the tiny little robots. And that's why I did this one right here as its own feature, because now I've got a continuous tangent chain that wraps all the way around there. And that's the kind of math that that CAD systems like. And so that gets me all the way to here. All right. And now it's time to think about, how am I going to add these Art Deco ridges right here. All right. And it's pretty clear that that's going to be a sweep But there's a couple of qualifications to that, all right? So the first thing I'm going to do is create a sketch on the plane that I already generated for the center line of the whole thing. All right, and this is an important sketch. This is going to create the path for the sweep. And you'll notice that it's just this one purple line. And that's because the way that I created this is I went in here to sketch and I did a project intersection, an intersected projection. Projected intersection? Yeah, whatever. Anyway, the way that that works is when I select intersect, now anything, any body that intersects the sketch plane is going to produce projected edges where that body passes through said sketch plane, okay? You can kind of see it a little bit better. If I were to select this one, okay, you can see that that fillet intersects the sketch plane where that red line is. And if I selected that and said okay, now I'm going to get that curve right there. So that's a pretty powerful thing, but I don't need that. So I'm going to back out of this sketch and come back out here. All right. And I've got that, and that's a path. But it's important to keep in mind that this thing intersects that entire surface, and it travels all the way around here, and I don't want these ridges to wrap all the way around there. And I'll show you how I'm going to control that in a second. But the first thing I need to do is generate a sketch plane along that path that I can sketch the profile of those little ridges. And part of how I'm going to control how far those ridges extend around the surface is by dictating where on the path that plane actually is, okay? This distance right here is what sets that. And that 0.01 is just a proportion. It's basically 1% of the entire length of that path is where I'm going to put the intersection point for this construction plane, all right? So that gets me that, all right? Now, my next thing is I need to actually go ahead and sketch the profile of these ridges, all right? And they're just three little triangles. And I've used an intersected, a projected intersection to get me a curve here that I can use. I've positioned the first triangle directly with relation to the path, and I've got all of these constrained until they look about right, okay? And now I have all three of these profiles in one sketch. And so when I go to do the sweep, I'll select all of those. And even though only one of them is attached to the path, that's okay. They will all be swept along that path. So we'll go to there, and you can see what I have. All right. Now, you can see that they only extend to here. And that's because when I did the sweep, all right, the total distance is just this arbitrary number that looked good to me. And the same thing on this side, the start distance, okay? It's actually 0 because I only want to be right there at the sketch plane. I could have extended it further if I wanted to, okay? So that's how I get those ridges that are going to create that cool detail, okay? And then, again, I'm going to start applying some fillets. And the first one is going to be to round off that top edge. Okay, the next one is going to be the one that rounds the end of it like that. And again, I had that tangent path created by the first one. And now I have a tangent path that wraps all the way around each one of these. And that gives me the fillet that blends it in at the base. And look, this is important. Fillets are one of the most computationally intensive things that you can do in solids modeling. And so it's important to be disciplined. Like filleting is almost a skill unto itself. And it's important to be disciplined in how you generate them if you don't want if you don't want to get the spinning beach ball, or even worse, just have a crash. Like back in the day, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was doing this stuff in Pro Engineer, I would, and I still do this, it's just a habit that's never died, is before I did any kind of filleting that looked like it might be kind of complex, I would save my work. All right, so the next thing is the combine feature, and that's basically where I'm going to take these two bodies and combine them into a single one. And I'm going to use that now to finish out. And these are all simple steps. I just used a previous sketch to create the indentation for the lock cylinder. And now I'm just creating the slot for the key, which hopefully will print enough to take a wash and look good, because this is going to be a part that'll be painted in silver lacquer or chrome and have a black wash on it to hopefully pick up all these details. And look, the thing is, you're probably already way ahead of me thinking, okay, this part is 5 millimeters long, 6 millimeters long, and these don't even stick out 0.1 millimeters. Are they even going to print? Well, I hope so. I don't necessarily know that they're going to print really good, but on my Mars 4 Ultra with the 18 micron pixel dimension, I have really high resolution. And I'm going to print this part at 10 micron layer thicknesses, so I think I at least stand a chance. But the bottom line is, I won't know till I try, and I want to push the limits of what this printer will do. And, this is the way to find out what those limits are. All right, now my final steps are just to add some fillets to finish out this base feature and a couple of indentations to create the screw heads. Now, one thing that I want to point out, okay, because I made this yesterday and I've already come back and looked at it, and I think that my handle is actually a little too long. All right, if I come back out here and I unisolate this and I go back and turn on the entire assembly view, all right, I think that my handle is a little over large. Okay, when you compare it to this picture, yeah, it's a little bit big. When you look at the position of this handle right here and the windows and everything, I think my handle is a little oversized. And this happens to me a lot. You kind of just get going and it looks good, and then you realize later, oh, damn it, it's too big. And that can happen pretty easily when you're calculating in your mind whether or not the features are going to print. Now, it doesn't look bad, and I don't think anybody's really going to know, but I may choose to make that handle a little bit smaller. And that's a challenge because while everything else is parametric and I can go back and I can adjust dimensions with this door handle, I can go back in here and I can go back to this sketch right here, and I can edit that sketch. Oops, wrong sketch. Sometimes picking the right one is difficult. But I can go back and I can edit the sketch that generates that that profile for the very first sketch that creates the outside profile of the handle. I can change the length of it, and the sketch will be fine. But what won't be fine is the forms bodies, because forms are not parametric. Okay, you'll notice that when you go in to edit a form, all right, none of these changes that I made to these edges and points and all the things are preserved in any way. All right, they're not on any kind of a timeline. There's no list of them here where I can go back to those individual things. And that's just part of the deal with forms. And like, in order to give you this ability to do this free form surface modeling, you give that up. And so if I want to change the overall size of this handle, and I don't want to basically go back and start all over with the forms that generate these surfaces, because that's what it means. That's what I would have to do. If I don't want to have to do that, I really only have one other option, and that is to go back to before I created before I joined these things, and go in here and do a scale. All right, and I don't know that it's going to work, but we can try it. Okay, but it's going to be this body right here. I'm going to grab that, and if I scale it down by, let's say, 0.75, okay, you can see immediately what's going to happen. All right, it'll scale it, but it's no longer in the right place. And so I'm going to have to then use an additional modification command and move it over. And the features that I created all along here are no longer going to fit. So before I can even think about doing that, I'm going to have to take advantage of the superpower of the timeline and rearrange some things. Like, I'm probably going to delete this combine and go in here and modify the size. Use the scale command first, and then put the combine command down here at the very end of the timeline. Make it be the very last thing. Or maybe, actually, because I want to keep these features right here the same, I'm probably gonna put it in, put the combine in, or the scale in right here. I don't know. This is how it goes. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of tinkering to figure out what the best strategy is, or if I want to just blow it off and let that handle be a little large. And that may be where I end up. We'll see. Okay, I don't think it would be fair to go on about the door handle and whether or not it would print without giving you the opportunity to see the real thing. I told you it's tiny. And they printed pretty good. I'm actually surprised that I got the key slot. Hopefully you can see it. I mean, these things are so tiny. But it does not look like I got those cool ridges, and honestly, I don't know what difference it would have made even if I had, because they're not going to show up under paint on the finished model. But anyway, yeah, there it is. Okay, so there you go. if you're using Fusion, if you are a prospective Fusioneer and you just kind of are curious, Fusion curious, and you want to see how things are done, hopefully that was helpful. I know it was long, but I really believe that when you're using Fusion, that the details matter, and that when you kind of learn the detailed, correct, best practices, if you will, that it will ultimately make your life easier and more stress-free. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it and get some use out of it. As always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.